I'm sorry, say that again, Zan.
I said, ready, go, start,
And
go.
we're live. We're live. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another Saturday. This is Wander to the Edge. My name is Adam Asher from The Edge of Adventure.
I'm Zanne. I'm from Where Gals Wander.
Zan, as always, great to see you. Great to spend a part of Saturday with you. And we always have great guests and great friends to join us. But I figured before we introduce today's guest, and he's a special one, very unique guest. He's got a unique story to tell, and you're going to want to stick around for that. But, here in Atlanta, it's springtime, and it's heating up now. I can actually roll my sleeves up, and it's nice and warm here in Atlanta. And that's kind of my way of saying we're going to be talking to someone who lives in a place that's rather chilly, even now, still
Yeah.
on the cool side. So looking forward to traveling to Alaska today.
Well, I'm excited. I mean, Alaska just has this air of adventure and mystery. And so we're going to welcome Raymond to the show today and learn a little bit more about his life and hear his stories. It's going to be awesome.
Zan, you're really good at this. You should do this more often as you welcome us all to our favorite program.
Wander to the Edge.
Raymond, hey man, great to have you on the show.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
We're looking forward.
Well, I'm nervous. I've not done with these before, so I am nervous.
Well, he's happy to be here. So far, so good. The tough questions haven't started yet, but yeah, Raymond, it's great to have you on the show. And you and I are connected and met on via Twitter, and you have a very fascinating account. And yeah, like Zan said, it speaks to adventure and this rugged outdoors. And so we're going to get into all that today. So thanks for being here.
Well, thank you.
So my first question that I want to ask Raymond is, living in Alaska, any desire at any point to ever live anywhere else?
Well, I have lived other places, but it's tough to leave Alaska. Alaska has freedoms that you don't find other places. An example might be I can go out. Last weekend, for instance, I went out on a trip where I took my four-wheeler, pulled a trailer with my four-wheeler, went probably 15 miles off the beaten path. Didn't see another soul. Set up a camp, set up a tent, a wood stove in my tent, kicked back, did a couple of things, chopped some firewood, had a bonfire. And then the next day I drove back out, but you'd be hard pressed, I think, to do that in most places where you can just go out in the middle of nowhere and do what you feel like for a while and not see another person.
So do you consider that rugging it, so to speak?
I don't, I guess. It's funny on some of my social media accounts, I have people go, well, how come you did this? Or what for this? Why that? And it's like, oh, because that's how you do it. And so it doesn't seem really very crazy to me when I think about what I do and how I do things, but I do have people ask lots of questions. So I think I'm not the average person out there, probably.
But they're not accusing you of glamping. I mean, tell me they're not.
We just did a video. It was funny. My wife and I did a video and we named it hot tinning or glamping. And we were having a conversation in the video about what is the difference between glamping or hot tinning. I mean, you got a tent, you're out in the middle. It's where we were at. I think it was -20 that day and or dropped down to -20 that night. And there's a wood stove in the tent. There were times we had to open up the vents and let hot air out of the tent because it was too hot in the tent. And so we had cots, we had sleeping bags, we had a great meal. So are we glamping or are we hot tenting? And so we had quite a little conversation. We didn't want to be glampers because, glampers are for those ritzy people. And so we wanted to be hot tenners. And it was really interesting conversation. And I'm not sure I know the difference. What we decided, not that this is necessarily accurate, is if you're glamping, you go to a setup that someone else has set up that's fancy, and you just drive your car up, you get out, the stove's already cooking, and so you don't have to do any of the setup. So that we didn't have to be glampers. That's how we defined it, so that we could be hot tinners. I don't know what the difference is.
Well, I would say that if you're going out into the Alaskan wilderness and you're taking everything with you and you're setting it all up, I would not consider that glamping. I mean, that is camping. And don't you kind of have to have some source of heat in that kind of weather? I was looking at your pictures. We're going to be sharing some of those in a few minutes, and I think there's one picture where you're holding up like the thermometer there, and it's I think it's -53 or something like that. But it's a dry heat, right? I mean,
I took that picture because I was shocked myself. That was the day I made a big mistake. I learned something that day, though, because I try to learn from my mistakes. But most of the time, in -53, yes, you better have some source of heat, or life's not going to be long, let alone fun. But yeah, that one was a mistake. But realistically, a person could comfortably camp in -20 if you had good gear and a good sleeping bag and all that. You just wouldn't want to get out of your bag in the morning and have to get dressed. So I think a wood stove in your tent makes it so that, you can get up, you can have on your, whatever you're wearing and be comfortable, play cards, have a meal, have a conversation, be outside your sleeping bag and be comfortable. And so it just makes comfort.
I can't even imagine being outside when it's -20. I grew up in Chicago. I've done it. I've been there through winters, but let alone look at that and say, let's go camp in this. Let's go sleep outside. That, I don't know. Not for me.
I would say, with the right gear, you'll surprise yourself. If you have good gear and you have a good setup, you'd be really, really surprised. You'd be so comfortable. You go, how come I haven't been doing this? I should do this. Look how many people are here. There's no mosquitoes. There's nobody else out here because nobody else wants to come out here. So you got it all to yourself. It doesn't get a whole lot better, really.
Raymond, raised in Alaska. That's the name of your brand. That's how someone would look you up on YouTube. And also, we've been putting the Twitter handle up. They can also find you just by searching for Raised in Alaska. Give us the short version of your history, the amount of time you've lived in Alaska, and why is it such a part of who you are?
And so Raised in Alaska really, more than anything, comes from, I have children and I'm working to raise my children in Alaska. So Raised in Alaska was really supposed to be about, when I first named it, was supposed to be about raising my children in Alaska and, the trials and tribulations and having kids and teenagers and trying to get them outside and do things. That's really what the title Raised in Alaska started out as. I was not born in Alaska. I moved to Alaska later on, but I have been here for quite some period of time. Maybe not long enough. I probably should have moved here earlier because I've had lots of great adventures. And if I would have been here longer, maybe I would have had more. But it's really about raising my kids in Alaska.
And how do your kids feel about that? How are they embracing this?
Well, they are teenagers now. I just had a conversation with my daughter that was in a video that we just sent out last weekend. And we were talking about how to engage kids in the outdoors. And as a teenager, she didn't want to talk a whole lot, and didn't want to say a whole lot. She did say some stuff. And what was funny is she said, well, when we were young, we didn't have a choice. We had to go. And so I thought that was funny. And for a lot of parents, that's very true. I think the hard thing to do, and what we discussed in that, and something I'm trying to get out of both my kids and my wife in upcoming videos is, how do you engage kids? What is the trick? And I wish that I would have known even what I know now when my kids were even younger. But I know there's a lot of people like myself that are struggling with how do I engage my kids in this? How do I make my kids say, hey, can we go camping this weekend? I mean, wouldn't that be awesome? I wouldn't say that my kids are all the way there. Sometimes I would say my daughter right now is more interested in outdoor activities than it seems like my son is. But there was a time where my son was much more active, and I look forward to a time when he'll come back to that. And I think that will happen.
Yeah.
Raymond, you've spent 3 winters in the Arctic. I want to hear about that. And also, for those of us who've never been anywhere near the Arctic, help us understand what it's even like. Take us there so we have some concept of what it's like other than being cold.
Sure. The Arctic is glorious. I think there's nowhere else probably in the world that's like the Arctic. It's amazing. It should be on everyone's bucket list. And so if we were going to go to the Arctic, so first of all, the Arctic means above the Arctic Circle. So if we were going to go to the Arctic, we would most likely charter a plane or get on Alaska Airlines plane in Anchorage, Alaska, and we would fly on a 737 for an hour and a half north. And we would land in some village that there are no roads to get to that village. There's no way there other than by airplane. And during the summer, you could take a boat up there, but golly gee whiz, it would take a while. And so there's no way in or out other than by plane, by and large. And so we're going to land up there. And depending on the time of year, in the wintertime, it's not uncommon that we have minus 20 to minus 50 degree weather. 50 is more on the extreme. Minus 20, it'll be minus 20 for weeks. And there are people up there really friendly. They're small villages. Most of the villages will be between maybe as few as 50 people to as large as 3,000. The 3,000, there's probably about 3, maybe 5 villages that are 5,000, and they're called hubs. And so a hub village is going to be on the water because during the summertime, they're going to bring barges and big ships in there, and they're going to unload lots of goods and things like that. Then everything gets loaded onto little bush planes, and it gets shipped out to the smaller villages. So if you're in a village of 500 or 50 or whatever, most likely the only way that goods and services come in is by airplane. Maybe in the summer, a little bit of boat action, but by and large, everything is going to come by airplane, where the hub ones will get, so the hubs are going to be a lot cheaper. Everything is all electricity is made in diesel generation power plants. Yeah. There's a little bit of solar and a little bit of wind maybe, but almost everything is diesel, which is interesting because then you got to, in the wintertime, the water's going to freeze. And so you can't get a boat there. So in the summer, they bring up barges. They have huge tank farms where they unload hundreds, thousands of gallons of fuel because it has to not only provide all the electricity in the village, but then anytime you want to go snow machining or buy gas or stove oil for your house, you have to go there. So all the fuel gets delivered in the summer. And so it's pretty remote, but the people are really friendly. Up there, if you're out on the trail, so I mostly spent my time in the winters there, so I'm out snow machining. If you're out snow machining, you never, ever pass anybody on the trail without getting a thumbs up, either to them or from them. And that's just to say, you okay? Everything good? If anybody stopped on the trail, you slow down and double check. Are you okay? Because realistically, they could be fine. Their machine could be broke down, and in 2 hours from now, they could freeze to death. And so you're constantly, if you ever run into anybody out there, you're always double checking. And everyone's that way. Everybody's so friendly. But it's remote, but it's got a beauty that you'll find nowhere else. You'll go out and there'll be sunrises and sunsets. In the wintertime, the sun's going to come up. This is the horizon. The sun's going to come up over the horizon, and it's going to go like that and disappear. You get 3 hours, maybe 3 hours of pretty indirect sun, and then an hour on each end where you get some light from some sunset light, basically. Yeah, kind of like that. Okay. The whole horizon all the way around you will be that color right there. Instead of, normally we're used to saying on one side, there's the sunrise or the sunset on one side. It'll be that way all the way around. You'll be out 5 o'clock in the morning, walk out and the northern lights are blazing in the sky. There'll be hundreds of caribou. You'll see migrating past, going places. There's bears, there's muskox, there's foxes. You see lots of foxes. I have some video of a lynx that I was probably 10 yards from, which is really, really unusual. They're a very secretive animal. They don't like people. They don't like anything other than food, I guess. And so they're hard to get close to. And I don't know if I send any of those, but I have a video probably 10 yards from one. Just absolutely amazing.
Tell us about this moose here, though, because before we went live, you were sharing some of the stories. This is a fantastic picture, great picture. But then I was listening to you talk about, I guess, the fact that you have watched this moose over a period of several years.
I've watched him now. I filmed him for 2 years. I initially bumped into him last year just on a whim, and was managed to get a few pictures of him, but nothing this good. And the thing that's really unique about him is most of the time moose are always very symmetrical. They have a paddle on each side, some points on the paddle. The points might not be totally symmetrical. And then they have some brow tines, or the points that come right off of his head there, the closest ones above his eyes. Those are called brow tines. And they'll have some brow tines. So you got some brow tines, even paddles, and that's it. Almost never do you see a bull that has junk on it or trash on it, non-typical points. This guy has had non-typical points 2 years in a row, and specifically his left side, he has those hooks coming out, and he's had those for 2 years in a row. So it's clearly not he harmed it when it was in velvet or something. That is a genetic trait that he carries. I'm really looking forward to seeing him in this upcoming year, and even in years to come. He's a young bull. He's probably 6 or 7 years old, and he'll hit his prime probably when he's maybe 10 or so. And so it's just like moose are kind of like dogs to a certain degree, or even like teenagers. In the first year of life, they get their skeleton. And then after that, they start putting on mass. And it will take a moose maybe 6 to 8 years to put on enough mass so that they are king of the hill. This guy is not king of the hill out where he is. He's probably the third largest bull, but he is the most non-typical, really cool bull. He's one of my favorites, but he's very reclusive. He's difficult to get. This was a super, super lucky day. I'd seen him from probably 2 miles away or so, and I'd moved into a place that was downwind from him in the direction that he was feeding, and I just hid behind a tree and waited for him, and he just fed my way, and fed my way. And this picture's probably taken 20, 30 yards away with a camera, and he's looking right at me. I was behind a tree, and about that time right there, he saw me, and you can see one ear is pointing directly at me. This is the other thing they do with their ears. They're like microphones. He's listening with that one ear facing right at me, and the other ear, he's listening off to the side, and that other ear would move around because he's seeing, is anybody else out there? What's going on? But he's looking at me and he's listening to me to see what I am. And I'm partially behind a tree here. So I'm not standing out in the open, and he can't really see my outline. So he probably doesn't 100% know exactly what I am, but he knows there's something there. The other thing about him, though, is he doesn't have a whole lot to fear. A grizzly bear would have a tough time with him. A grizzly bear would probably just avoid him because he's 7 feet tall at the shoulders. He probably weighs 950 pounds. A grizzly bear would just avoid him. So he really has nothing to fear other than a hunter with a rifle. And this is way past the hunting season. This is past the rut. And so he has nothing to fear necessarily, but they're always wary anyway.
Just to that point, there's a lot of beauty in Alaska, but there's some danger as well. What is it that you have to be careful of sort of with your lifestyle and with your explorations?
Well, I think the first thing that most people worry about and should worry about are grizzly bears. There's a fair amount of grizzly bears up here. And so when you're out, and every single year in Alaska, somebody will get mauled by a grizzly bear. And not uncommonly, somebody will be killed by a grizzly bear. A person was killed by a grizzly bear just this last year. I think they'd left their house. They were brushing a trail, clearing out a trail for something, and they didn't return home that night. And when they sent out people to look for them, they'd been actually killed by a grizzly bear, which is rare. Most people get mauled really, really bad, but generally they don't get killed. And so I think the first thing
when you say most people get mauled, like typically how many people a year would be?
There's some years that we've had as many as probably 4 or 5, but every year there's at least 1 or 2. And when you consider how many people are here and how many people are visiting and stuff, your odds are pretty good. But there are things that you can do, most certainly, I think, that stack the odds in your favor. And I spend a lot of time hiking and hunting and doing different things outside. And I'm always mindful when I'm traveling outdoors, I'm always mindful of where I am, what's going on, where do grizzly bears like to hide? I mean, if you're out in the middle of the open, grizzly bear's not going to probably be there in the middle of the day. And if they are, you'll see them or they'll see you kind of. And typically speaking, when people get mauled or eaten by a grizzly bear, and they don't get eaten very often, they mostly just get killed. You've walked up on a grizzly bear, you've surprised it, they have cubs or they have food. And so they see you and they go, and they just hit you hard, and then they leave, by and large. And so you want to make sure that they know where you're at, that you know where they're at. And so when you're out in the open, you can look around, you can kind of see what's going on, or more likely they see you and they leave. They want nothing to do with us. But when you're hiking, if you, like, let's say you're hiking along a ridge line and you drop down into a valley, and in that valley, the timber gets really thick. Now you better be very careful. And whenever I'm in that situation, I'm always mindful of, okay, which way is the wind blowing? Because if the wind's blowing on the back of your neck and blowing out in front of you, they're going to smell you, and they're probably going to leave because they want nothing at all to do with us. And so you can be less cautious, I think, if the wind is in your back and your stench is going out in front of you, if you will. I think we stink to them. But when the wind is in your face, they can't smell you. If you're being really quiet, they can't hear you. And now is the time that you could surprise one, and you never want to surprise one. And so I'm always super mindful of, can they see me? Can they smell me? Where am I? Am I in a place that they're likely to be this time of day? Am I out at a time of day that they're more likely to be active? They're mostly going to be active. Oh, this is a really cool picture here. They're mostly going to be active first thing in the morning or last thing at night. That picture right there, that's at a bear bait station that I ran for 2 years. That barrel is suspended. The top of that barrel is 6 feet tall. So that bear is sitting on his fanny, and his head is nearly at 6 feet tall when he's sitting on his fanny. That's an enormous bear. But back to task. So that's what we're worried about right there.
And I actually wanted to ask, what is a bear bait station? What's the purpose of it? You say you ran one for 2 years. Fill us in.
Okay, so so different people set them up different. This one was set up so that barrel, that's a 55-gallon drum, which gives you an idea compared to his head, how big his head is. His head's as big around as a 55-gallon drum. So you set it up, you put food in it, and it attracts them. They come in. A lot of people hunt bears this way. A lot of people are very offended that people hunt bears this way. I set this up so that I could put a game camera on it because I wanted to learn about grizzly bears, and I wanted to have the experience of seeing them, being around them, and see what's the deal, what goes on. They're a fascinating animal. They're a super smart animal. I have some really interesting tales just from that. I'll call it an adventure. I did it for 2 seasons. Generally, you do it in the spring when they come. So grizzly bears den up during the wintertime, and then in the spring they come out. They've lost 25 to 40% of their body weight. So they come out, they're hungry, and they're going to eat anything they can find. Usually they come out of their dens before the moose calve. And so before the cow moose have had calves, they're out looking for food. And that's important in this story. And so you put up a 55-gallon barrel, cut a hole in it. They come and they take food out of it and they eat it. And at this one, I probably had 5 different very large bears, and then several other bears that would come in to it. So this is why the moose calves are important. As soon as the cow moose calve, the big boars, a boar is a male bear, the big boars quit coming to bait. They would much rather go and eat moose calves, go chase them around, do whatever they have to do to get a moose calf, than come to bait. There are some places in Alaska where the predation on moose calves are as high as 98%. And so out of 100 calves that are born, maybe 2 will make it. And most of that predation, it depends on the place. Some places it's wolves, some places black bears, some places it's grizzly bears. But it's like Thanksgiving time in grizzly bear land during moose calving season. But so you set it up, they come in. I had a game camera set up there. I have 2 different videos, I think, of the seasons from that. So, if a person was interested in that, there's some monster bears that come in there. I have some video or some still pictures of me standing beside that barrel, just so you can see how tiny I look compared to that barrel and how tall that barrel really is. It really puts that bear in perspective.
What is your advice? I live in California. There are bears here and mountain lions and other fun stuff. We actually had a bobcat in our backyard not too long ago. But if you encounter a bear, what is your advice? What should we do?
First, look big. The first thing is, look big. If you're with other people, you bunch up. What you will kind of want to look like is a pack of wolves. And so if there's more people there, and the bigger the wolf, the better. And so I'm going to look as big as I can. If other people are there, I'm going to crowd them up next to me. If I have my children with me, I'm going to have them behind me because I don't want them to think, oh, look, there's a little tiny moose calf. And so I'm going to have them behind me, but they're going to look big too. If you have bear spray, I would get it ready, get it out. And then the other one is the other thing that's very interesting. And I saw a fish and game officer do a talk on this. He had a road flare. And so, when you pop a road flare, there's a flame that comes off of it like this, and then it bellows out smoke. And so you pop one of those, and now it looks like you're 20 feet tall with this big bellowing smoke coming off. So it's not a bad thing to carry. Most of us don't carry a road flare, though, by the way. And so we're going to look big, and we're going to start backing up slowly away from there. We want that bear to have space. We're not going to turn and run. One of the things that's interesting, the difference between like a predator and something, a herbivore. A predator, if you start running from them, it's like your cat in your house. If you get close to your cat and you flick something quickly, your cat's going to chase it every single time. Any predator, if you start running from it, you might trigger its automatic predatory instinct, and it might just tackle you and then go, it's a person, I better get out of here. But by then, the harm has been done. Whereas with an omnivore, like an elk, a moose, or something like that, like I've been run off by moose before, and you get too close, you're filming or something, one of them sees you, wins you or something, and then and instead of moving away, they decide, I'm going to come over and teach you a lesson. I call it getting Hulk stomped. And so they start moving toward you. If you turn away from a moose and start running, they'll go, okay, they just wanted you to leave. They just want to intimidate you into leaving. You're gone now. You're no longer a threat. And so with a moose or an omnivore, a herbivore animal, you can generally run and they leave you alone, where a predator may chase you. And so never run from one. So we're going to look big. We're going to make noise. Hey, bear, hey, bear, hey, bear. We want to know that we're here. And then we're going to start backing away in case if they have food there, or if they have their cubs there. We want them to know, oh, buddy, I'm giving you space. I'm leaving. And more often than not, that's a very successful tactic. But the very first thing that we want to do is we want to be paying attention to our surroundings. We want to not ever have that encounter to start with, ideally. But if we did accidentally surprise one, that would be the advice that I would follow.
Raymond, by the numbers, what would you say is actually more dangerous, running into a moose or running into a bear?
In Alaska, the statistics are that you're more likely to be harmed by a moose than you are a bear, partially just because I think there's a lot more moose than there are bears. And realistically, if you're in an area where people are actively hunting bears are afraid of people. And so they work to avoid us. So some people can be all down on it and stuff, but I think when animals are afraid of us, we have less negative encounters with those animals.
I'm looking at some of the photos that you're sharing, and it is just
fascinating.
So, yeah, gorgeous. What made you decide the area to live in Alaska? What were some of the criteria that you kind of had in your head as you were making that decision to move? And what was important to you? You mentioned, to raise your kids. Kind of share with us, the discussion that you have with the family after you all decide to move to Alaska.
Well, I've lived in several different places in Alaska, and usually it's been for different reasons, but a lot of it's been for my kids. When my kids were babies, through 5th grade, I wanted them to live in a small community. I wanted them to be able to get on their bicycle and ride, down the street 2 blocks to their friend's house. I would not feel comfortable in a big city doing that. And I would say Anchorage is like a big town, even though people in Alaska will be upset by that. It's kind of a big town. It's really not like a city. If you've been to Seattle or, where you guys are at, Atlanta, people would land here and go, oh my goodness, this is not a city. Alaska people, don't be offended, please. But I wanted my kids to be in a town of like 3,000 people where you pretty much know everybody. Everybody knows you. Your kids can go somewhere. They can do things. I grew up in a rural area, and I wanted my kids to have that experience. And as a parent too, this is just me, I don't want my kids to have the anonymity that you can go 2 blocks from the house, do whatever you want, and nobody will ever know. In a small community, if you're 3 blocks from home and you spit on the sidewalk, you can run as fast as you want to get home. Somebody's going to call your house and say, hey, your kid just spit on the sidewalk. Send him back to clean it up. I like that. And I think that that's really how life should be to a certain degree. But once we got older and the kids were getting ready to go into high school, I believe that in a small community, in a really small community, in a high school, you're not going to have very many electives for kids. And so you're going to have reading, writing, and math basically, and maybe chemistry every other year or something like that. And I wanted my kids to have a full opportunity to take electives, follow them where their passion goes. And that really requires a large comprehensive high school. And really the only places in Alaska that have large comprehensive high schools would be like Fairbanks, some of the places on the Kenai, Anchorage, and probably maybe on the Kenai, not so much on the Kenai. You're probably looking at Anchorage and Fairbanks are probably the only two, maybe Juneau. And so if you want that experience for your kids to, to be able to chase their passions in high school, I think that you need to be in a bigger high school.
Raymond, what would be one of the most unique aspects of Alaskan culture? Something that the rest of us from the lower 48 or the other 49 we might either be not used to, shocked by, or find kind of curious.
Wow. Well, and not everybody, I can't speak for everybody in Alaska, but for most people, I would say that we live closer to our food than a lot of people do. And what I mean by that is it's not uncommon that people from Alaska go out and harvest their own food. It might be fishing, it might be hunting, it might be gathering berries. There is some places where there's gardening, but most of it is really that subsistence, that ability to subsist on the land. And you really, and that's pretty common in Alaska. I would say that I'm going to guess that more people harvest their own food in Alaska than in most places would be one thing that I think is more unique than other places. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It reminds me of this article that I read that says that people were born with certain skills, like how to figure things out. Like they figured out how to garden. They figured out how to hunt. They figured out all these basic skills to survive. And as we've socialized and become more modern, that we've actually lost touch with those skills. And this article went on to say, eventually, if we're ever in the situation where we are having to rely on ourselves to get through, there's a lot of folks who just are not going to be able to figure that out. Like we've lost that whole instinct almost.
Well, I might say that we've traded one set of skills for a different set of skills. I think that there's a set of skills that we really need to be successful in modern society right now that aren't the same set of skills that you'd need to be necessarily successful when the apocalypse comes. And most of us aren't thinking the apocalypse is going to come anytime soon. So it might be a set of skills that's not as useful as other sets of skills, perhaps.
Sorry, I got lost in the video there, which I'm very proud of. Not because I took the video, Raymond took the video, but I figured out how to run it and play the video live.
We're all very proud of you, Adam.
Yes, and I need as much attention for it as I can get. But game cameras. I want to go back to that. One of the reasons, right, why we're even talking today is because you've taken this love for Alaska and the outdoors and all the things you've been talking about, and you have chosen to share it and to convey it through social media. And that's, of course, how I met you. The game cameras, you mentioned that you will set those up in part to study the animals. Tell me about that.
Well, personally, this is just me. I think it's a fascinating game, if you will. It's kind of like hunting to a certain degree. You go out and you try to figure out where are the animals going to go? What are they going to do? Where's going to be a really cool place to put a camera? I put game cameras out in places that were a total bust. And year after year, there are some places that I found. I have three places in mind that when I say this, I found three places that are like animal magnets, if you will. And so lots of animals come through there. And so to a certain degree, it's just a game. Where can I put this where I can get the coolest stuff, where I can get the most amount of animals. And I've learned things that, it's like, well, that's not going to work right there. And I've put some up that I'm just curious. It's like this last summer, there was a trail that I hadn't noticed before. And I saw this trail going up this hill, and it's like, what the heck is on that trail? It was an odd place for a trail. So I put a game camera up there for 3 weeks to see what happened. I honestly thought that it was a bear trail. It was early in the season when the snow line was receding. And so I thought a bear had went up high, denned up, and was coming down and still going back to its den during the day was what I thought. And after I put it up, there were moose using that trail. And I really didn't think it was moose when I first walked on the trail and looked. I didn't see any obvious moose browse things and things that would lead me to believe that it was a moose. I didn't see any hard hoof prints. And so I really 100% believed it was something else. So it was just curiosity. And so sometimes I'll put them that way, but more often than not, I'm looking for those super highways, those places that are going to have lots of animals and lots of action. It's really fun. And I joke with people on social media that it's like Easter egg hunting for adults. You put it there, you go out and you pull your game card, because they all have a little card in them, that you put in your computer, little SD card. And so you go out and you pull your SD card and, oh gosh, I can't wait to get back and see what's on here. And so all the way home, you're going, oh, I hope this. And there's been times when I went back and I forgot to turn my camera on, and there's nothing there. There's times when I went and weird things happened. The light was wrong. This was wrong. And there's other times where animals have got their nose just right up on the camera. And you're like, wow, that's really cool. They're probably smelling me. And so I think I just find it fascinating trying to figure out what they're doing and why they do it and where they go. And I've gotten some really unique things out of that.
So what's the most unique thing that you've captured on film?
Well, I have got a couple links, which I think are always a treat. They're so reclusive that you just don't see them much. I've got a couple of those, but probably the most unique, cool footage that I've got this last year, I got one where a grizzly bear, and it was a decent sized grizzly bear, not a monster, probably a 6.5 foot bear, came walking through past my camera, and it got to the end of the opening that you could see, and it turned around and ran back past the camera. And it's like, what was that about? Where was he going? And so that was a really unique capture. Another one that I got, I've gotten ones, I have a couple cameras that I put in places that the moose frequent during the rut. And so I've got lots of rut action. I've got them calling each other. I got a bull last season trying to mount a cow right in front of the camera, which was interesting and unique. And just seeing, I got ones where moose are in front, two bulls are sparring right in front of my camera. I have one that's been very interesting. 3 years ago, I went up to, there it is. Yeah. 3 years ago, I went up into the lower reaches of sheep country. So it's high above moose country. It's up in the steep rocks. It's steep. It's ugly. There's lots of openings around there, but there's some timber. It's way out of moose habitat. It's the lower reaches of sheep country. And I put a game camera up there because there was two trails that intersected in a place. And I thought, okay, I'm going to see what's using these trails. It's probably sheep. And I don't have anything in sheep country. So I think it'd be interesting to get some sheep pictures. And lo and behold, this little tiny scrawny moose calf shows up right in front of my camera. It was a yearling moose calf that had been born probably 2 months before that. It spent the entire summer up there in front of my camera, lounging around, laying in front of my camera. It disappeared for a few days here or there, but it was the cutest little thing. And I was really surprised. I mean, number one, it had no business up there. Number two, no other moose was up there. Its mother never showed up. I suspect that it probably survived some predation event. Its mother was killed somehow, and somehow it managed to get away. And so it moved up there. Not very good food. There's water close by. I guess there's some food, but it's steep. And if you're a big animal, and granted, it was a small animal then, but if you're a big animal, it'd be horribly uncomfortable to be that steep. That's why moose aren't up there. And so the following year, I put my camera back up there because I did get lots of sheep action then. I put my camera up there, and lo and behold, a yearling cow, so it was a cow that was 1 year old, shows up scrawny, smaller than most cows should be. She got a tough start in life, and I'm sure that it was the same one because there's no other moose up there. And then last year she showed up again, and she was scrawny, small for a 2-year-old. She was about the size of what I would expect a 1 year old cow to be. No calves. Usually a moose will throw 2 calves every year. So it'll have 2 calves. And by the end of summer, if it has 1 calf left, it's a pretty darn good mother. I mean, the predation is very high on them. But she showed up early on with no calf at all. So I'm going to put one back up there this year, this upcoming year, and hope that she's back up there. I think that'd be super cool. But we'll see. So it's been interesting to follow her. I named her, and actually I did a little poll on Twitter to pick a name, and people named her Moosey McMooseface or something like that. So I just call her Moosey. And so it'll be interesting to see if Moosey's there, and hopefully she has a calf with her this year. That'd be super cool. But there's a lot of bears up there. Up in that area, there's lots of bears that show up and stuff like that. So it probably would not be the safest place. But you know, once you're a big animal, they don't want to get close to you, but they'll chase you until they can separate you from your calf. So we'll see.
So you have to promise me that next time you name animals, a moose or a bear or whatever, you have to name one Adam and one Zanne. Will you do that for us?
I'll do that.
Okay.
And you name the one Zanne that is extremely stubborn and refuses to be told what to do. That's the one you name after Zanne.
Gotcha.
Am I right, Zanne?
You might be right.
Okay.
And the really, really furry one, you have to name Adam.
Ouch. Okay, good. That was good. I'll take it. Hey, Raymond, we're getting close to the end of the show here. A couple more questions to get to. Seasons, they do change. I mean, I know that they may not change in the same way that they do in Georgia or in Southern California. I don't know. Does they change in Southern California? Maybe not.
We get 2 weeks of rain. That's it.
But what are the seasons and how do they affect the activities throughout the year?
Well, so I'll say we have 4 distinct seasons, and maybe we kind of don't. Some people say we have 2 seasons. We have road construction season and non-road construction season. But in the summer, we'll start in the summer. In the summer, in the middle of summer, in July, in the Anchorage area or so, it never really gets dark all night long. I've put on, I remember one year, a buddy and I were going to go king fishing. So we're going to fish for king salmon. We put on at 10 o'clock at night because the tide that was coming in, the king salmon followed the tide in. And so we wanted to catch that incoming tide. And we figured at some point in the night, we would just anchor up until it was light enough that we could see again. And it was never dark enough that we couldn't safely navigate the river. And so in the summer, you can have as much as 24 hours of light. It might not be all direct sunlight, but you'll have 24 hours of light that you can see and go out and do things for a small period of time, 2-3 weeks, maybe 2 weeks in there, at least in the Anchorage area. If you go into the Arctic, it's a lot longer than that. And so in the summer at least, I'm going to do boating. I'm going to do fishing. I'm going to do some hiking. We'll probably do a little bit of ATVing, but mostly in the summer, in the big summer months, we're going to be looking at fishing, and we're going to try to fill our freezer with fish, actually. And we'll do a little bit of camping in there. And then in the fall, we'll do some hunting. We'll do some ATV stuff. We're going to do hiking. The leaves start turning, although it seems like here, the leaves turn and then they fall off the next day. And so it's not like you can count on that glorious, beautiful, everything's a different color for very long. You get 2 or 3 days and that's about it. But so we'll do hiking and hunting during that time, some ATV action, maybe if we're lucky. And at that point in time, there is still, the silvers are starting to come in. So silver salmon are coming in, and the humpies are starting to, and the humpies will be finishing up about that time. So you might get a little bit of fishing in, but we'll mostly do hunting and the outdoor recreation that way. And then when winter comes, in the dead of winter, you're going to have about 5 hours of light. And so you better start out in the dark, have your gear ready to go, be able to unload, and go out, and then be comfortable coming back when it's going to be dark, probably. So we're going to go out, we're going to do some camping, because I really love winter camping. There's no bugs, there's nobody else out there. You have it to yourself. Nobody's even going to come by. And we're mostly going to access that by snow machine. And so we'll load everything in a sled and pull the sled out there behind a snow machine. I always do some snowshoeing. We'll do some hiking when the snow gets hard. You can hike on it. Otherwise, you're going to end up snowshoeing. And then some cross country skiing. Although I can honestly say I've not done any cross country skiing this year. I've been busy, mostly camping. It seems like this year's really been a good camping winter for me. The Iditarod just finished up, so that's a cool one. I went and stayed at the beginning of the Iditarod, actually about 11 miles into the Iditarod this year, and watched all the mushers go by. Fantastic camping trip. I got a video up on about that. And then spring will come. The nice thing about spring is the days get long. I mean, we'll have 10, 12-hour days right now, which are really, really nice. So you can load up all your gear, go out, and daylight's on your side. You're not rushed. And then, so we'll do some there, and then a little bit later on, and we'll, you're going to hike still in the spring, hopefully, but it's still snow machine season. But the great thing about spring is you got long hours of snow machine season, so you can really spend some time out. And then, then I guess we're back to summer. So the seasons, I mean, I always think, number one, every adventure is going to be a special adventure. Never wait for the weather. Have gear ready to go out and do stuff. Typically speaking, I mean, if you wait for the perfect weather, it's never, ever going to come. The perfect weather only comes when you're already out there. So go out there and get ready. And it's going to be great weather regardless. But you got to get out there to get it.
Okay. My final question.
By the video.
It's fascinating, which number one, he has fascinating video on YouTube. Again, go to YouTube, look him up there, subscribe to his channel, and you'll find him by looking up Raised in Alaska, and you'll find him there. And then, comment on the videos, subscribe, support him, and all that. And you'll find him on Twitter. There's his Twitter handle, AKKINGON. Okay. And you can see it there. And then as we get into the audio version of the podcast, you'll just have to take my word for it. AKKINGON, or easy enough, look them up as Raised in Alaska. All right. Again, closing in on the final portion of the program. We've talked about bears, and we've talked about the situation with the mooses. I feel like I should be saying meese. Is it? It's not. It's not the plural. It's not meese.
It's still moose. Yeah.
Okay. The moose. But what other things in Alaska do we think about as being dangerous? And for someone who might see this video and think, I got to go, that place looks amazing, I'm going to go. What's a rookie mistake that could be a bad mistake?
I would say be prepared for weather. The weather can change quickly. One example that we kind of touched upon earlier, but I didn't go into very much. The minus 53 degree one. I was in an Arctic village. I had left the Arctic village on my snow machine, and it was minus 20. And realistically, I was very comfortable going out. Minus 20 is really kind of like the lower threshold of where I like to be. You can stay warm. You're going to be fine. The problem is, even at minus 20, if you break down or something goes wrong, your shelf life is very limited. And so, when it starts getting that cold, a person needs to be a lot more careful. And so I'd left at minus 20 thinking, oh, this is good. I'm going to be fine. And I went upriver about probably, 15 miles, 30 miles, something like that. I went upriver a ways. And when I got there, I noticed I was getting cold. I had on probably 4 layers on the bottom and probably 4 layers in the outer layer was a parka on top. And I noticed I was chilly when I got there, and it's like, well, what's going on here? And so I got my little laser thing out and tested it, and it was minus 53. Well, at minus 53, realistically, if you had a breakdown or you got stranded out somewhere, you wrecked your snow machine, you got stuck on your snow machine, which happens, the amount of time that you have before things really go bad is super short. I don't have an actual minutes, but it doesn't take very long where frostbite sets in. You can lose limbs. It doesn't. Every year people die. I guarantee you this is true. Every year people freeze to death in the Arctic. They fall through the ice. They get misplaced. They get lost. Bad things happen. And so you want to make sure that you're not that person. And at minus 53, nobody's out. At minus 20, you might run into somebody every hour. Maybe somebody comes by if you're on a trail. But at -53, nobody's silly enough to be out in that temperature. People are smarter than that. I wasn't smarter than that day. And so I would say be very conscious of the weather. I mean, if you fall overboard in a boat and you get back in the boat and it's not super warm outside, you could get hypothermia. You just want to make sure you have good gear and that you're really careful that way. I think that's the biggest rookie mistake, is just gear.
Yeah. Well, I learned a lot. Thank you so much. I mean, it was educational. It was mesmerizing. Your tales are just fascinating. I'm so glad that you joined us.
Well, thanks for having me. It was great.
Definitely, Raymond. We learned so much, and I know the Travel Tribe, our group of friends, if they are not already following you, they're definitely going to be joining you and participating in your journeys now, because this has been entertaining. It's been interesting, and it is exactly what you do so well on social media, which is to allow those of us that don't live there, that don't know that world, allow us to experience part of it with you. And so thank you for doing that. And then, of course, thanks for joining us today here on the show. Again, one more reminder to everybody, look him up on Twitter and on YouTube. You'll find him very easily in both of those places. He has a very active following, lots of great content, and he continues to update it. It's not just there. He's always putting up new content. So check it out. Look for Raymond. The best way to find him is just to do a search for Raised in Alaska. Raised in Alaska. You'll find him on Twitter and YouTube. And check him out. Support what he does. He's an awesome guy.
All right. Thank you.
Speaking of awesome, don't forget to follow us too.
Okay. I think I already am. I am. You're talking to everybody else.
All right. Raymond's off the hook, but everybody else, you're in trouble, because if you need to follow us on Facebook and Twitter, Instagram, and especially on YouTube. We're trying to get to that 100 subscriber mark. We're getting pretty doggone close. And once we do that, then the world, apparently they say everything changes and everything's so much easier after that. But seriously, we appreciate everybody's support. Do look for us on all the different social media platforms. And also be sure that you share this content out, share out the interview so people get to know Raymond. And again, we appreciate everybody. Thank you. God bless. Have a wonderful Saturday, and join us again every Saturday at the same time, right here
on Wander to the Edge.